Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. Today we're going to do something a little different.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we asked you all to send in some sources
Okay.
that you thought would be interesting to look at.
Okay.
And boy, did you deliver. So we've got a really interesting mix here. And
Yeah.
I think we're going to touch on a lot of stuff today. I mean, we've got like the pulse of American politics right now. There's this resurgence of trade wars.
Hmm.
Elon Musk is everywhere these days. Like his influence just seems to be expanding.
Right.
And there's this potential shutdown of USAID.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, lots to get to today. But one thing that really stood out to me right away was something with the last election. More people chose not to vote for Trump than did, and even more didn't vote at all.
Wow.
I mean, that's a pretty crazy statistic, right?
Yeah, it is. It really makes you think about this pattern we've seen throughout American history.
What do you mean?
Well, think about it. 2020, 2008, even going back to 1976. American voters, they tend to throw the brums out after a few terms.
Ah, so like a pendulum swinging back and forth.
Exactly.
So are we just in the middle of another one of those swings then? Or is this something, I don't know, is it more than that?
Oh, that's the question, isn't it? Some folks are saying this low voter turnout, it's a sign of apathy, that people are just disillusioned with the whole system.
Yeah.
Others are saying maybe it's that voters are becoming more discerning. They're holding their leaders to a higher standard. But let's dig into that historical context a little more. Is this a sign that our democracy is in trouble? Or is it just a course correction, a healthy one?
I see what you mean. It's not just about the numbers themselves. It's about what's behind those numbers.
Right.
But speaking of things that could shake things up, there's also this whole thing about trade wars making a comeback.
Oh, yeah.
And this time it feels a lot closer to home.
What are you talking about?
I'm talking about the tariffs that the Trump administration has slapped on Canada, Mexico, and China.
Right.
They say it's all about illegal immigration and drugs and all that, but I don't know, it feels a little familiar.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's like the same song and dance we heard back in 2018. And if those tariffs are anything to go by, I mean, I think we could be in for some rough times, economically speaking.
I think you're right. Remember those 2018 tariffs? They basically acted as a hidden tax hike.
Really?
Yeah. And the worst part is they hit lower and middle income Americans the hardest.
Oh, wow.
So if we follow that same logic with these new tariffs, well, it's not a pretty picture. You see, tariffs are essentially like an extra fee tacked onto imported goods.
Okay.
So let's say you buy something from China.
Right.
When it gets to the U.S., the government tax on this extra fee, the tariff.
Okay.
And guess who ends up paying for it a lot of the time?
The buyer.
Exactly. You, the consumer, end up paying higher prices.
So even though the idea is to protect American businesses, it might actually end up hurting the average person.
Exactly. And it's not just individual consumers. The whole economy feels it.
Yeah.
You've got businesses relying on these imported goods facing higher costs. That can lead to job losses or more price increases. Think about companies like Walmart. They depend a lot on imports from China.
Right.
So they might have to raise prices on a bunch of stuff, which hits your wallet directly. And that brings up a key question.
What's that?
Do these tariffs actually do what they're supposed to do? Or are they just hurting the very people they claim to help?
It's like this big economic and political puzzle.
Right.
And I don't think anyone really has all the pieces figured out.
Nope.
But hey, speaking of people who seem to be playing a different game, we got to talk about Elon Musk.
Oh, yeah. What's he up to now?
Well, this whole thing about him having access to the Treasury's payment system, it's got everyone talking.
Yeah. The Treasury Department, they keep saying his access is read-only.
Right.
But even that, it's risky.
Right. How so?
Well, imagine having access to all that info, real-time updates on government spending, including sensitive stuff, like payments to intelligence assets all over the world. Someone could use that information to manipulate things, maybe even for their own personal gain.
This sounds like something out of a movie.
It does, doesn't it? And he's not stopping there. He's openly talking about canceling certain government grants,
Oh, wow.
saying he wants to shrink the government.
But is that even legal?
That's the thing. It's a legal gray area, which makes it even more worrying.
Yeah.
The power to decide where the money goes, the power of the purse, it belongs to Congress, according to the Constitution. If Musk can just bypass that, it sets a dangerous precedent.
Right.
It's like giving one very wealthy guy with no elected authority the power to overrule decisions made by the people we actually voted for.
It makes you think, what would happen if this became the norm? Rich people getting to pick and choose which programs get funded.
Exactly. What happens to accountability then?
It's definitely something to think about. But speaking of things with potentially big consequences, let's switch gears and talk about the possible shutdown of USAID.
USAID.
Yeah, the United States Agency for International Development, they do a lot of important work helping out countries in need all around the world.
Oh, yeah, they help with poverty, disease prevention, promoting stability in some really vulnerable areas.
Exactly. So what happens if that lifeline is cut off?
Well, it could be pretty bad. We could see years of progress in poverty reduction just wiped out. Diseases could make a comeback because people lose access to health care.
Right.
And political instability. That could increase, maybe even lead to conflict. It's a domino effect.
So it's not just a humanitarian issue, it's about global security, too.
Exactly.
But couldn't someone argue that this is a way to save American taxpayers' money? You know, we don't have to be so generous anymore.
Well, that's a common misunderstanding about foreign aid. It's not just charity. It's an investment. It's a strategic way to prevent future problems that could end up costing us way more in the long run.
Okay, I see what you mean.
For example, imagine a region that's been destabilized by famine or a disease outbreak. That's a breeding ground for extremism, and it can force mass migration, both of which directly impact the U.S., our security, and our economy.
So American generosity, it's not just about being nice, it's about protecting ourselves, too.
Exactly. By investing in the well-being of other nations, we're also investing in our own future.
There's a lot to think about there, but before we get too caught up in the big picture, there are some other events from these sources that we should touch on, kind of like quick hits, if you will.
Okay, sounds good.
Did you know Trump's approval rating is lower than ever?
Yeah, his net approval at the start of this term is even worse than at the beginning of his first term, which was already historically low.
Wow.
He's facing some serious headwinds here, especially with some of his more controversial policies coming up. That pendulum swing we were talking about earlier, it might be even stronger than we thought.
And speaking of political shakeups, the Democrats have a new leader.
Right, Ken Martin.
Yeah, from the Minnesota Democratic Farmer Labor Party. He's the new DNC chair. What do you think this means for the Democrats?
It seems like they want a more strategic, behind-the-scenes kind of leader. He's already talking about doing a post-election review to figure out why they lost in 2024.
Makes sense.
They're definitely trying to regroup, find a new direction. I think one of their biggest challenges, though, is going to be understanding why they lost the support of certain voters.
Like who?
Young Black and Latino men, specifically. They shifted their votes to Trump, and the Democrats need to figure out why.
Yeah, and let's not forget about Biden's decision to run for a second term.
Oh, yeah.
Even though he said he'd be a transitional president.
Right.
That didn't go over well with everyone.
Definitely caused some tension in the party.
Yeah, it created this sense of, I don't know, chaos, like there was no clear plan.
Exactly.
And speaking of potential future leaders, what about this idea of Pete Buttigieg running for Senate in Michigan?
A Senate seat would give him some serious experience and a national platform, too.
Especially if he wants to run for president again.
Exactly.
And what makes it even more interesting is that he might be up against a Jewish lesbian candidate.
Yeah, that would be a historic race, wouldn't it?
It would, and it would force the Democrats to really look at their own internal dynamics, you know?
Absolutely. All those questions about identity politics and representation, it would all come to the forefront. It would be a real test for them.
A test of their commitment to inclusion, how they connect with a diverse electorate. It's going to be fascinating to see how that plays out.
It is.
But while the Democrats are sorting themselves out, the Republicans aren't exactly a united front either.
Nope.
They're still fighting over the budget, and it doesn't look like they're any closer to agreeing.
It's a classic Republican struggle, balancing that traditional fiscal conservatism with the demands of the Trump loyalists who want more spending on things like defense.
And then you've got the deficit. Some Republicans are really worried about it, while others seem less concerned.
Yeah, it's a big rift in the party.
You know, it really highlights the tension between these different ideologies within the Republican Party.
Right.
You've got the traditional fiscal conservatives who want a balanced budget and limited government.
Right.
And then you've got the more populist wing that's less worried about traditional economics and more focused on delivering on promises made to their base.
Yeah, it's like two different visions for the party, and they're clashing.
And with the 2026 midterms coming up, this infighting could really hurt them.
Definitely.
But, you know, speaking of choices that can have big consequences, we can't forget about that NTSB report on that terrible plane crash in D.C.
Oh, right.
It's looking more and more like all that overcrowding at DCA, which Congress had a hand in, played a major role in the tragedy.
It's a stark reminder that even small decisions, like adding more flights to an already packed airport, can have these huge, unforeseen consequences.
It makes you think about government oversight and whether there might be some conflicts of interest there.
Yeah, in this case, it seems like Congress, the ones who were supposed to be regulating air travel, they might have put politics ahead of safety.
That's scary.
It really is. And it makes you wonder what other potential dangers are out there just waiting to happen.
But wait, there's more.
Oh, boy.
Marco Rubio, he's got this new assignment.
What's that?
He has to convince Panama to give up control of the Panama Canal.
Seriously?
Yeah, it sounds crazy, right?
It does. I mean, why would Panama just give up their most valuable asset? Especially considering its history and how important it is to their economy.
It feels like another example of the Trump administration making these impulsive, unrealistic foreign policy decisions.
Yeah, it's a risky move, probably won't work, and could really damage our relationship with Panama.
And last but not least, we've got this legal battle brewing that could have major consequences for reproductive rights.
Oh, right, the case with the doctor in New York.
Yeah, he was indicted for prescribing abortion pills to a teenager in Louisiana, where abortion is basically illegal.
This case brings up some really big questions about state power.
Right.
Can one state go after a doctor in another state for providing care that's legal in that state?
And it's not just about abortion.
No.
The outcome of this case could affect all sorts of things, like gun control or even online commerce.
Anytime you have state laws clashing, it gets complicated.
So we're talking economic anxieties, political power struggles, technology changing everything, ethical dilemmas. It's a lot.
It is.
But by looking closely at these issues, I think we can start to understand what's shaping our world.
And maybe even figure out our own role in shaping the future.
We've got a lot more to unpack, so stay tuned. We'll be back after a quick break.
You know, as we dig into all this stuff, it's pretty clear that these events, they're all connected.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we've been talking about how these new tariffs could hurt American consumers.
Right.
But what about the rest of the world? How are they going to react?
That's a good point. They're not just going to sit there and take it.
Right. They've got their own interests to protect and their own ways to hit back economically.
What do you think they'll do?
Well, we could look at how the European Union responded to the tariffs back in 2018.
Okay.
They didn't just throw up tariffs of their own, though. They got strategic about it.
Oh, yeah.
They wanted to cause as much political pain as possible for the Trump administration.
Interesting. How'd they do that?
They targeted products that were important to key Republicans, you know, lawmakers in certain states.
So they hit industries that matter to those politicians.
Yeah, hoping to put pressure on them to oppose the tariffs.
That's clever.
For example, they put tariffs on bourbon.
Bourbon.
Yeah, which hit Kentucky hard.
Mitch McConnell's home state.
Exactly.
So what's stopping them from doing the same thing this time?
Nothing, really. And they've already hinted they're ready to retaliate.
What do you think they'll target this time?
They might go after agriculture.
Agriculture.
Yeah, products from states like South Dakota, John Thune's home state.
He's the Senate Majority Leader, right?
Yep. Imagine the impact on their soybean, corn, beef exports.
It's like a game of chess.
It is.
Each side trying to outmaneuver the other.
High stakes, too.
Absolutely. But speaking of tricky political situations, let's get back to Ken Martin.
The new DNC chair.
Yeah, he's got a lot on his plate trying to get the Democratic Party back on track.
He does. And one of his biggest challenges is going to be dealing with the fallout from Biden's decision to run for a second term.
Yeah, that didn't go over well with everyone.
It didn't. It created this sense of chaos, like no one was sure what was going on.
Exactly. And it really exposed that tension within the party.
Right. About Biden running again, even though he'd said he'd be a transitional president.
Martin's got to find a way to bring everyone together.
Yeah, and come up with a plan for the future. And they can't ignore those voters who switched to Trump.
The young Black and Latino men.
Right. They need to figure out what appealed to them about Trump's message.
Absolutely. But hey, what about this idea of Pete Buttigieg running for Senate?
That would be interesting.
Yeah, he'd get more national exposure that way.
And valuable experience, especially if he still wants to be president.
And imagine if he ends up running against a Jewish lesbian candidate.
That would be a historic matchup.
It would. It would force the Democrats to really grapple with those questions about identity and representation.
It would test their commitment to inclusivity, how they connect with a diverse electorate.
It'll be fascinating to see how that unfolds. But in the meantime, the Republicans aren't exactly a model of unity themselves.
Nope. Still fighting over the budget.
And it's not just about spending, it's about the deficit, too.
Yeah, you've got some Republicans really worried about it, while others seem less concerned.
It's another example of that tension between different factions in the party.
Yeah.
You've got the traditional fiscal conservatives who want to balance the budget and keep the government small.
Right.
And then the more populist wing that's less concerned with those traditional ideas and more about delivering on promises.
Two very different visions for the party, and it's not clear which one will win out.
And with the 2026 midterms coming up, this infighting could really hurt them.
Absolutely.
But, speaking of decisions with potentially serious consequences, that NTSB report on the D.C. plane crash is pretty damning.
It is.
Seems like all that overcrowding at DCA played a big part, and, Congress was involved in that.
It shows how even small decisions, like adding more flights to a busy airport, can have these terrible unintended consequences.
It makes you question the whole idea of government oversight.
Right. Like, are they really looking out for our best interests? Or are there conflicts of interest at play?
In this case, it seems like Congress put politics ahead of safety.
And that's scary. Makes you wonder what other risks are out there that we don't even know about.
And what about this whole thing with Marco Rubio and the Panama Canal?
I still can't believe that's a real thing.
I know, right? Convincing Panama to just give up control of the canal, it seems like a long shot at best.
It does. Why would Panama just hand over their most valuable asset, something that's so important to their economy and their national pride?
It feels like another one of those impulsive foreign policy moves from the Trump administration.
Yeah, high risk, low reward, and could really damage our relationship with Panama.
And then we have this legal battle over abortion pills.
Right. A case that could really reshape the landscape of reproductive rights in America.
It's a stark reminder of how divided we are on this issue.
It is, and it's going to be fascinating and a little scary to see how it all plays out.
The outcome could have repercussions far beyond abortion, It could affect things like gun control, online commerce, anything where state laws are clashing.
It's a legal and political minefield.
It is, and it shows just how much uncertainty we're facing right now on so many different fronts. It's overwhelming.
It is, but it's also a time of incredible opportunity. We're at a crossroads, and the decisions we make now will have a profound impact on the future.
So what can we do? How do we navigate all this?
Stay informed. Be critical of the information you're bombarded with, and talk to each other, even the people you disagree with.
It sounds like you're advocating for a return to civil discourse.
Exactly. Finding common ground. Especially now, with all this polarization and division, we need to listen to each other, try to understand different perspectives, and find solutions that work for everyone.
That's a great message.
We're all in this together.
We are. So let's take a moment to reflect on everything we've learned so far.
Sure.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? From trade wars and Elon Musk to the Democrats and Republicans and even that plane crash. It's been quite the journey.
It has. And, it seems like everywhere you look, there's uncertainty.
Yeah, and so much of what we talked about today, it all comes back to this idea of unintended consequences,
Right.
Like with the tariffs, they're supposed to help American workers, but they might end up hurting the most vulnerable among us.
And then there's Elon Musk and his access to the Treasury's payment system. Even if it's read-only, who knows what could happen?
Yeah, it's like we're constantly dealing with the fallout of decisions that seemed like good ideas at the time.
Exactly. And it's not just about domestic policy either. Think about the potential ramifications of shutting down USA.
Right, it's a global issue.
Exactly. What we're seeing is this interconnectedness. We can't just pretend that these events are happening in isolation. Every decision, every policy, it creates this ripple effect. And it's hard to predict how far those ripples will spread.
It's kind of scary, honestly. Like, Are we even in control anymore?
It's understandable to feel that way.
Yeah.
But I think this uncertainty, it also presents us with an opportunity.
Really?
Yeah, it forces us to be more thoughtful, more intentional with our actions. We have to think critically, question assumptions, and really consider the long-term impacts of our choices.
So instead of just reacting, we need to step back and think about the bigger picture.
Exactly. And that means staying informed, engaging in constructive conversations, and holding our leaders accountable.
It's not enough to just be aware of the issues we have to actually do something.
Right. We need to participate in shaping the future we want to see.
I like that, shaping the future we want to see. It reminds us that we're not just helpless bystanders, We have a voice, and we have a responsibility to use it.
Absolutely. And it all starts with understanding the complexities of these challenges. We've talked about a lot today, and I hope you've come away with a better understanding of what's going on and what we can do about it.
I think I have. And it's helpful to put things in historical context,
Right.
It's not just about these isolated events. It's about understanding the bigger picture the patterns and the trends that have led us to this point.
Exactly. History can teach us a lot about what to avoid and what to strive for. By understanding the past, we can navigate the present and create a better future.
So where do we go from here? What's the takeaway?
Well, I think the most important thing is to stay engaged, stay informed, and stay hopeful.
Because the future isn't written yet, right? We all have a role to play in shaping it.
Exactly. And that's a powerful idea, something to keep in mind as we move forward.
Well said. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. We hope you found it insightful and thought-provoking. And remember, your voice matters. Stay curious, stay engaged, and stay hopeful.